This is Power Talk 1210. The power to think for yourself on KEVT AM 1210, Sahuarita, Tucson.
I don't know. I've been playing blues for quite a while. I've been around the world a few times.
Folks, welcome back inside the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is hour number 2 of the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real musicians. How do you grow in life? How do you grow on your instrument? How do you fit into different musical settings? How? The answers are not absolute, but my guest today carved his own path of seeking, exploring, and playing. In order to grow in life, you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone and learn to communicate with people on the bandstand. For my guest, this translated into being part of the quadrangle known as the section. This fearsome foursome of Doerge, Sklar, Kunkel, and my guest were all trying to grow musically, and they found the perfect tonic by listening to each other, building to a crescendo, and then releasing back into the ozone in a cosmic sea of extrapolation and forward motion. My guest is one of the most unheralded studio guitarists in the history of our country. He has his own sound and was clearly influenced by the greats like Wes Montgomery, Jerry Garcia, and Kenny Burrell. He entered the music scene when it was a true business with budgets for records, Carole King Records and David Clayton Thomas Records, James Taylor Records, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and on and on and on and on. He cut his teeth with the Fugs and the Flying Machine, knocking around the zoo with Peter Asher during the days of Wine and Roses. But the studio scene is taxing, and the lifestyle can be grueling as well. Add to it a family with kids, and you become humbled real quick. My guest continues to burn at a prolific rate, using his dexterity to travel the country and play with cats like Jeff Pevar, and once in a while reconnect with parts of the section to play a whole note, because that band was always greater than the sum of its parts. Somewhere smiling at his grinning cheek to cheek, Danny Kortchmar, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi there, Jake. How you doing?
Nice to talk to you, man.
Good.
You know, can you talk about the first time that you collaborated with Jim Keltner?
Yeah, I can actually. Keltner was was and is a great friend and one of the great musicians in the world, really. I think one of the greatest of his generation, certainly. And the way I got to meet Jim was we were doing a session, I can't remember for who. This is around 1973, 72, 73, 74, right in there. Can't remember the exact date. Anyway, it was at United Western, which was one of the great studios back in the day. It still exists, but by a different name. I'm not sure which. It's changed hands a few times. Anyway, we're doing a date over there, record date. I'm getting to play finally with the great Jim Keltner. I knew about him. I'd heard about him. I thought of him as a jazz drummer because he played with Charles Lloyd and Gabor Szabo and these cats, doing this kind of L.A. jazz. So that I always thought of him as a jazz musician. And he presents stuff. He always wears shades, and he looks really cool. So, anyway, first time we're playing together, I hear him back there. He's behind a set of baffles. I can see him. I can just see the top part of him, from this, his chest up. And he's playing, but I can't really see his hands move. And then I put the phones on, and there's this incredible sound coming out. Keltner gets a sound like nobody else. And I realized, wow, I'm going to a whole other area here. Remember, I was young, and I was doing dates, but I was just kind of, it was the first 2 or 3 years of doing sessions. So Keltner, I'm playing with Keltner, and I'm doing my rhythm guitar thing that I do. And at one point he says, he tells the engineer, move this baffle out of the way so I can see that guitar player. He's pointing at me. So right there, we became great friends.
I only bring it up because I spoke to him this week, earlier in the week, and I said, I got Kortchmar coming up on the program, and he said I just had dinner with Danny like a couple weeks, maybe a week or two ago, and
that's right.
And Keltner, can you be a little more specific to the non-musician about the sound that he generates and how that sound is unique?
Well, it's two things. It's one, it's the way he has it tuned, which his kid is just so beautifully tuned. It's like playing the piano. It's so musical. And the other, of course, is just him. It's his chops, the way he hits it. You know, that's his sound. His sound comes from the way he hits those drums and his aesthetic, his overall approach. And all musicians are different for that reason. These cats, the guys you're from the era that you're talking about, all had a sound, a definite sound, and they were hired, including me, to have that sound, you know, and not sound like everyone else. So Kilmer certainly had a unique, wonderful sound, and is a unique individual.
as is Danny Kortchmar. You know, listen, I wanted to ask you, can you talk about? I don't know, did you go see a lot of organ trios in the city, or do you remember some of the guitar players that you got off on when you were really just fiddling around with the instrument?
Well, if you're talking about organ trios, I listen to that music a lot. All those Blue Note records and Prestige, the albums that came out on those two labels, featured a lot of organ trios, and I was really into it. I love Jack McDuff and, of course, Jimmy Smith. Anyway, as for the guitar players, I think Kenny Burrell was one of the greatest ever to play in that style. But George Benson was also unbelievable when he was playing with Jack McDuff. And if you get a chance to listen to any of those records with Benson, with Jack McDuff, it's really something. You know, I just dug the sound of it. It was low down and kind of funky, and I just dug it. So that music certainly did influence my playing.
And then ultimately, how did you hone your own individual sound? I mean, did you? How much live opportunities did you have to play when in the early '60s before you really came on the scene?
Well, I had, you know, as soon as I graduated high school, basically right away, I started a band. And the band was the King Bees, and we used to play all over New York City at all the what were then called discotheques. And we played R&B in a rock style. It was mostly R&B covers. That's what we did. And we had a few originals, but it was mainly rhythm and blues covers. And it was organ, two guitars, and drums. So I got used to playing with an organ player right away.
Very good. Well, we got a game on this program called Name That Tune, Danny. So we're gonna put in a piece of music here, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Okay.
Mr. Kortchmar is sitting at home in beautiful Connecticut right now. Can you name that tune?
Well, that sounds like Keep On Truckin' by Joe Mama.
You got it. There you go. And I'll tell you that.
I haven't heard it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard it since since we cut the record, basically.
Really? You've never heard that ever since that time? That's amazing.
Well, I listened to it when we made the record, but I don't listen to my stuff, you know, once it's done. Really, I'm not gonna go back and listen. Very rarely do I go back and listen to my old stuff.
Danny, this is very important, okay? As from a younger cat, younger generation, people perseverate now on their stuff. They listen to it over and over and over again. Why, as an artist, have you committed? Why? Because your generation not like that. You just kept going on and on and on. How come you don't perseverate on that stuff?
Well, I listened to it a lot when we recorded it, and when I wrote it, when we played it live. I already heard it,
I know, man, but your style, is that the kind of rhythm and blues rock kind of style that you're talking about before?
Yeah, you mean what you just played?
Well, as it relates, I know you were talking about the King, the trio, the original band, yeah. But I'm saying
King Bees, right? Yeah,
right, the King Bees. But I'm talking about that particular guitar solo, which just had this sort of, a rock flow, but with these nice changes in it. It's very beautiful.
Well, I think I'm playing a lot better now. And I heard that when you play it for me over the phone, it's not the best way to hear music. Of course, I wasn't really sure. I couldn't really hit the bass, so. But I hope I'm a lot better than that now. That sounds like that solo sounds very nervous and unsettled to me at this point.
Right. And so, I've asked Cavallari this. I've talked to McLaughlin about it, and I'm just wondering if there was a certain time in your career where you saw it. You were burning the candle at both ends pretty hard. And did you get into transcendental meditation, or did you have a guru of sorts at any point in your playing career, especially during the busy times?
Well, my guru was Otis Redding and James Brown. Great job.
Right on. So it was nothing ever to a spiritual point. It was never about altering consciousness without chemicals or anything like that.
You know what? I wish I had taken that route. I really do. But I was so involved with music and chasing girls and having a great time that I didn't really take it seriously.
And can you talk a little bit about bringing a large parrot to band rehearsals?
God. Well, you're talking about Joe Lala now.
Uh-huh.
And Joe is a wonderful percussionist. I haven't heard from him in a long time. I don't know if he's still alive. I hope he is.
I don't know if he might have passed on, actually, yeah.
Well, I was never sure about that. But he was a great guy and a really terrific percussionist. For him from the school. And at one point we wanted him to play with our group, the Section. We wanted him, we liked the idea of having a percussionist. So Joe came to the rehearsal. The first rehearsal we had this kind of dumpy place in Van Nuys, California. And Joe shows up with his gear, but also with a parrot sitting on his shoulder. The parrot is on his shoulder. He loves this parrot. So we're looking at each other going, okay, parrot. Sure, okay, great. And we started to play. Joe is an eccentric guy, a really lovable person. So he was the kind of person you made allowances for. Let's put it that way. And so we break up. This all happened in 2 days. Russ remembers this really well too. I'm hoping I remember it the same as Russ, but. We do the rehearsal, it's a long rehearsal. The parrot's sitting on Joe's shoulder the entire time that we're doing this, and also crapping on his vest, of course. So I go, rehearsal ends, we go home. Now it's late at night. I'm hanging around. I don't know what I'm doing. It's like late. The phone rings. It's Joe. He's in tears because his parrot basically committed suicide, flew into a mirror, broke its neck, and has fallen dead on the ground. Joe is absolutely beside himself. He's hysterical. He's crying. He's weeping. He's wailing, and he's also asked for money to go out and buy another parrot.
Right. Moving on. Yeah.
This sounds like one of Lenny Bruce story or something.
Right.
I think that's where the story ends. I don't remember. I don't think we gave him the money. But I can't remember. But I have a feeling he didn't spend it on a parrot.
Danny, I want to believe that did you get off on bluegrass growing up too? Sometimes I see you playing, you play quite a few instruments. I've seen you play a mandolin or maybe a dobro. I'm curious about your experiences with when you were on the East Coast before you left for LA about, did you see Bill Monroe? Did you get off on any of that stuff?
Well, the folk craze happened, in the early 60s. And both James Taylor and I were really heavily influenced by it. We both he and I and our pals used to listen to some bluegrass music, the Charles River Valley Boys, I think, and some other stuff. It wasn't until later that I really started to listen to bluegrass, when I discovered Bill Monroe, and especially the Stanley Brothers, who were awesome, of course, the greatest. And I was turned on to it basically by our drummer, Joe Bishop O'Brien, who was a huge influence on me and on James and on, I would say, everyone he met. The guy was an encyclopedia of music, film, literature. He was an incredibly bright and erudite fellow. And he turned me on to bluegrass, but the stuff I liked the best was the slow stuff, the really slow murder ballads and things like that. The speedy banjo stuff didn't do much for me. It's just really not my cup of tea, but I love those stories, and I love the harmonies, the haunting harmonies, that high, lonesome sound that you hear with the Stanley Brothers especially.
Do you play? Do you get a chance to play in a bluegrass settings at all? I mean, I see you out in.
No.
Not at all.
No, I don't.
Talk a little bit about in the late '60s. Did you and Larky grow up together? How did you first meet each other?
All right. Well, that's when James and I had the flying machine, kind of mid '60s, '67, '60, right around in there, and we were playing at the Night Out Cafe down on 3rd Street, McDougal, and in the Village, French Village. And a lot of bands would come through there, and some of them were really good. We managed to hold on to our gig for a long time at the Night Out, because bands were constantly auditioning to play there. And one of the bands that played there was a band I'd already kind of heard about, which was the Middle Class. They were really good from New Jersey. And it turns out that the Middle Class had signed, Carole King and Jerry Goffin had signed those guys to their little label, and they were making records. Anyway, I became friendly with some of them. Charlie and I became good friends, and also with their guitar player, Rick Philp, who's brilliant, wonderful guitarist. And then, so because Charlie was in the Village, everyone was hanging. We started hanging out together. And we ended up in the Fugs after my band and his band broke up. We both ended up in the Fugs. That's I guess called sidemen. And we became pals. We ended up out in L.A. around the same time. Great guy. I had a lot of fun with him.
Is he still around?
I haven't seen him in years.
Yeah.
The last I heard, I think he's in Austin, but I'm really not sure. He, I think because of his relationship with Carol, he got, it's very disappointed with the way things were going, I guess, and changed the course of his life and walked away from playing bass, I think, for several years. But I'm not sure I lost touch with him after that.
Danny Kortchmar, it's just an honor to have him on the Jake Feinberg show. I know you don't perseverate or go back and listen to a lot of stuff, and I'm sure you don't go to YouTube and check out stuff. But when you look at the unamplified, intimate shows, when I see them, I mean, Lee's on an electric bass sitting down. James is hunched over a microphone. Carole King's playing an acoustic piano. There you are with an electric guitar. Kunkel's on kit. In your memory, looking back on that, did you take that for granted? That intimate quality of music, as opposed to today, where there's just a need for ideas, huge amounts of ideas and amplification. I mean, when you look back at that time, how do you see it from a holistic music point of view?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. Let me just say that part of it was technology. This was before you could amplify an acoustic guitar, so James is playing into a microphone. So now we're all walking on eggshells to keep it down to the level where James's guitar and vocal can be heard. One of the things that drove him crazy in that band I mentioned, the Flying Machine, was that that club, he and I were both playing electric guitars, bass and drums, and there were no monitors, so he had to sing way louder than he should have had to get over the sound of the band. So now we've got it all toned down. Like I said, the acoustic guitar was, it was only so loud you could get it in the monitors because of feedback. So now we're all walking on eggshells and to bring it on down. In fact, it's a good thing we were sitting down because that kept the energy
low.
So low. And we all sat close to each other as well. And now finally there was monitors and we could really hear what was going on. and we served the tune. You know, Peter Asher made the template for that music in terms of how he produced Sweet Baby James, and that's how we learned to play together. Right? Was that record and the next one, Mudslide Slim. That's where we, Russ and Lee and I learned how to play that music.
Yeah, I look at those pictures. I have some British pressing of One Man Dog, and there are you guys in I guess it was James's house, and he had a recording studio.
Well, yeah, he had a barn, and that was the upstairs of the barn.
And I see Kortchmar like leaning back in a chair, laughing. Kunkel's got a glass of orange juice on the drum kit, and I'm just like, this is the way music was made at one time, and that's why it sounds so warm, and it sounds so deep. And you got to realize, man, that's really the issue is that what am I hearing? What is the difference between analog to digital? I know it sounds like a very generic question, but the warmth of that, the digital sound just doesn't, I can hear it. There's just a definite difference. And I think as a producer, I'd love you to talk about how the sound has changed. I know drum kits, you had funk drummers, at a certain point they'd set their kit up to have a certain sound. You talked about Keltner, the way he tuned his kit. But can you break down that analog to digital divide?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. And to me, it's very simple. All those records we made, including Tapestry and all of James's records, we're all in the room together. Everyone's in the same room, playing at the same time. Now, that sounds like an obvious thing, but it isn't. Very, very few records are made like that anymore. They're mostly made piecemeal, one part at a time. As for the analog and digital, I think that's overrated. I think Tom Dowd was known to say that had he had Pro Tools when he was working on all those early Aretha records and all that, he absolutely loved it. He definitely would have used it. The reason why is because the analog sound you're talking about comes to the signal, not where it ends up. Really good engineers can know how to mic stuff, know how to mic a set of drums, how to mic a room where you've got 4 or 5 guys in it. Now, at that point, the difference between recording to tape and recording to Pro Tools, I think, is minuscule. More is made out of it than I think is really true. It has to do with the chain, the miking, the mics and preamps that you use, and again, very much has to do with guys in a room. If you don't have guys in a room together, you're not going to get that sound. It's what happens when everyone plays together. So that's my answer to your question, pal. Well,
listen, man, you are one of the most intense guests I've ever had. But I'm going to go further with you and ask you. Okay, so guys are in a room now, guys and girls. How did you? That's the wrong way to say it. When you and Lee and Russ and Doerge were starting to cook, talk about, it's not just playing together, it's also, I remember Chuck Rainey told me something to the effect of managing your ego. How did you manage, can you give an example of the section, or just even Danny Kortchmar, knowing that you had to sacrifice for the betterment of the band? I don't think in today's world with the elevated ego that you'd be able to have a band that could stay together for so long, because you'd have these it's not like you didn't have that before. But with those James Taylor records, or, it can go on and on. I don't know how many sessions you guys were in. It's just that I think you understood your role. And I'd just like you to go a little bit deeper than just being in the room together.
Well, part of it is I was taught how to play in the studio by some very astute fellows, namely Peter Asher and Lou Adler and Carol. And that's how I learned to play. And they always brought me back to the song. What's going to work in the song? Don't play over the melody. Play something that's going to help. And all my favorite guitar players coming up were like that too. Steve Cropper, Curtis Mayfield, Cornell Dupree, David T. Walker in L.A. All those guys knew how to set up a song. So they were my favorite players. Everybody else was listening to lead guitar, and I was listening to these guys. To me, Steve Cropper's playing on those Stax Fold records, those Otis and Sam and Dave records. That is the essence of how you play a song. Curtis Mayfield's playing on the impressions and his own stuff. Again, it's to serve the songs, because those guys were my heroes. My ego, and I have a huge one, has to do with coming up with the right part, adding to the song, and that assuages my ego. At the time, of course, when I was playing with James and Carol and them, I was also jamming like crazy all the time, every day. When I wasn't in the studio, I was jamming. and that's what I was able to, play solos and turn up and all that, play louder. So that's helped balance it out. But when I got in with those guys, when you hear a song like that, You've Got a Friend, you're going to make that, you forget ego, that's a great song. All you're going to do is try to find some way of being in and helping tell the story, helping to present that song. And the same with any of James's songs, and certainly all of Carol's songs.
How do you serve today in the capacity when you're producing an album? How do you work with younger cats because most of the time they're not in the same room?
Well, when I was doing a lot of production, which was 90s, 80s and 90s, I would put them all in the room together, and they would play. I produced the Spin Doctors record, for instance, and they were all out there playing together at the same time. So I never really got into doing one part at a time. But I'll tell you, at home, when I'm working on my own stuff, I do it like that because it's just me. So I layer stuff up. So the most experience I've had doing one part at a time has been with me, working on my own stuff alone in my room.
It's half past the hour here in Tucson, and we got another tune for you, Mr. Kortchmar. So settle in, and
Okay.
We'll come back and break it down.
Great.
Welcome back. Kortchmar, what do you got for us, brother?
Well, that's the section, certainly forward motion, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm not. I was digging through a record store in San Diego a couple years ago, and I pulled out this record for $9.99. I saw these four cats on the cover. I said, "Who are these guys?" And I got. I mean, my daughters, 9 and 3 respectively, have been marinating on that album, side A mainly. But you're. I mean, are you listening back to that? How does your guitar playing sound? How does it sound to you?
Well, when I listened to that, I realized that there was guys. I knew at the time, of course, there's guys that do that way better than me. Like Lukather and Landau and Larry Carlton and a million other guys now that play that kind of music, which I guess you'd call it jazz fusion, whatever you want.
Right.
Way better than I can. I was having fun doing it. It's the way the band was going. And I did the best I could. You know, we were under the influence heavily of the fusion bands at the time, like Weather Report and especially Mahavishnu Orchestra. Can you imagine? We used to open for Mahavishnu Orchestra. And so I'd have to go out there and play guitar on the same stage with John, and it was like, you know, I was always shaking in my shoes because he was so absolutely unbelievable.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, because Kunkel said that McLaughlin would go out. I mean, again, not even the performance aspect, but he would actually tell the crowd to be silent. Like he would have everybody bring down the noise, and it was a spiritual thing. And I'm like, the section opened for these guys. I mean, how great. I mean, it's invigorating for me to be able to go back and, I mean, I'll talk to John at length. Did you have a chance on the road, if you went on the tour, would you be able to talk to him too about things?
Yeah, we were hanging out and they were hanging out, but right after we played, they went on, so it wasn't like we had a lot of time to mind meld. But he was and is an absolutely great guy, and very, very centered and grounded fellow, and he was an absolute inspiration for me. I think a lot of people were scared to death when he first came out, but when I heard him, I went home and started practicing. First time I heard them live. Actually, Nat Weiss, James's attorney at the time, was managing them, or he was lawyering for them.
Mm-hmm.
With us an acetate of the first album. And we couldn't believe our ears. We couldn't believe it. It was just incredibly great. And Johnny's just one of those wonderful cats, man. He really wrote the book. His influence will go on forever, in my opinion. Absolutely superb. None better.
You brought up all these fusion bands like Return to Forever, Weather Report. When I talk to guys like Stanley Clarke or Alphonse Mouzon, could be anybody, a lot of them say that, they were just trying to channel in their mind, they were trying to keep the legacy of John Coltrane alive. And McLaughlin would say the same thing. And I that's what I kind of meant before you mentioned Benson and we talked about Kenny Burrell. But did you feel like you were trying to not carry on, but who were the guys that were the standard bearers that you wanted in your music, that you wanted to keep be a link in the chain?
Well, I just wanted to be part of the game, and my major heroes along those lines, certainly Coltrane and Miles, just like everyone else. Those two cats was a huge influence on everything that has happened since. And the thing that Coltrane and John McLaughlin had in common, in my opinion, is they were both really trying to get high, and both of those guys started off using drugs and then went to a much higher plane, a spiritual plane. But they're trying to get high. As I watch John play, I know he's shooting for the stars. He's trying to get to a place that is beyond anything that can be described. A very high place. So that's what I mean by that. And I think Coltrane, the same thing. You listen to Coltrane's stuff when he went modal. I mean, it's so absolutely riveting, and it takes you to a place just listening to it every time. It still does. That is really extraordinary.
Did you get a chance to see Train?
Yeah.
Can you talk about, was it during this modal period?
Yeah. Me and my pals used to go in the Village all the time and go to the Half Note, the Five Spot, and all these groovy jazz slugs. These are all the jazz clubs that were in New York, and they were just bars basically. There was nothing special about them, but I got to see the Coltrane Quartet, the original quartet, the legendary quartet, and really long, unbelievable solos Coltrane was playing. It's just incredible, unbelievable. So yeah, I got to see him, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, there was Slugs, and there was Folk City, and there were just so. I mean, Folk City, you could say, Tom Paxton would be in there, or even whatever. But then all of a sudden, Elvin Jones Quartet would show up in there as well. I mean, you really came of age, and then you mentioned Curtis Mayfield, and that kind of just blew my mind. Curtis, you said, was it a major influence as a rhythm player? Did I hear you correctly say that?
Yeah, listen to his parts on those Impressionist records. I mean, it's what he's playing. You can call it rhythm, but I just call it playing the song.
Mm-hmm.
He was unbelievably exquisite guitar parts, and then you hear them all the time. Listen to People Get Ready, the intro to that. It's otherworldly, I think it said the same thing about Marvin Tarpon, I believe his name is, who was the Miracles, Smokey and the Miracles guitar player. Also, exquisite stuff. So those guys knew how to play songs, and that's why I was interested in what they were doing. And I appropriated a lot of their stuff when I was playing with James and Carol.
I want to say something. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I bet Kortchmar moved to Los Angeles, and the first unsung cat that you met was Marvin Smitty Smith. Right or wrong?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that right?
That's right.
Wow, what a gut!
Yeah.
Because I looked at your first solo album.
By the way, it's William Smitty Smith.
Why do I keep saying Marvin? That dude. Okay, William. Thank you. William Smitty Smith, because I looked at Cooch, which, by the way, I don't know how much that album's selling for, but I've never seen that album in my life, from '73, and I'm still looking to get yeah.
Good luck with that.
No, but what I'm trying to say is I looked at the people that were the companies that you chose to be on that album, and he was playing like a lot of it. And I said, I know Kortchmar must have been hanging with. Please tell me how you met Smitty and how he, because, you're going out there, and it's like you don't know anybody.
Well, that's right. I didn't, but let me see. I'd been there for a little while. I was sharing a house with Joel O'Brien and his wife up at the top of Laurel Canyon. And 2 houses down, there were 2 couples that were right next to us. One was Jorge Calderon and his wife, Tessie.
Wow.
She was a Kunkel player and Jorge bass and vocal. And I'm sure you know that Jorge Calderon is a really, really well-known and beloved guy from the L.A. scene. And he played with everybody.
Wow. I'm more familiar with Tessie with working with you.
Yeah, well,
right.
That was right. She played congas. And so, right, and then one house past the Calderons was Smitty and his wife at the time, Tish, I think her name was. And he had a setup in his room there, and he had a B3 setup. And since I was living with Joel was a drummer, we used to go down there and jam all the time.
Oh, my God. Get me in there.
And Laurel Canyon was like that. You've read all the legends and stuff, but there was a lot of people playing and jamming and writing songs all over Laurel Canyon. And I was lucky that Smitty was right down the block. Great keyboard player, really great organ player, real deal organ player.
The real deal organ player. But when you say jam, were you guys bringing in original tunes? Were you playing all types of things across the board?
Yeah. I'm sure we played a lot of funk. We played, some James Brown tunes, and we played, anything that you could jam on. And I don't think it was original stuff. Maybe someone would whip out an original tune, and Smitty would probably whip out one of his tunes once in a while. But mostly it was just jamming. We'd start on an A chord. You see where it took us,
But he basically called the Calderons. How did you get ingratiated to the studio scene? I'd love to. Was there somebody, a conduit, to say, hey, Danny, why don't you swing by tomorrow for this session? How did that work out?
Well, that came from playing on Tapestry and Sweet Baby James. That lit us all up. Now, keep in mind that Peter Asher, I believe, was the first guy to put the names of the musicians on the album, and Lou did that as well.
I love it.
Tapestry, and this is why, for instance, the Wrecking Crew is not well known, because they played on a million records, but they weren't listed. Nobody listed the musicians then. These records came along, and we were kind of the next generation of the Wrecking Crew. I like to think, anyway.
Absolutely.
They were so absolutely great. And because Peter and Lou were putting the names of the players on the albums, that was like a huge deal for us, because we got recognition. And those records, were huge, and they kind of fit together as a singer-songwriter thing. So we started getting a lot of calls, especially Russ and Lee. Got a ton of calls to start to play on records by people who with similar intent.
Well, I've interviewed Blaine and Emil Richards and these cats. I asked, it's a value thing too. Blaine probably was the drummer on all the Beach Boy hits, and I said, didn't you feel insecure or made you upset if you didn't have your name on there? He's like, the truth is that we saw our families ascending economically. We're all moving up, moving into bigger houses, and we just wanted to play the music. And then the time period that I'm obsessed with before I was born is 65 to 75. And that's when Kortchmar's name starts to appear on the records with Grisman and Sklar and Kunkel and Smitty and all. And all of a sudden, you guys got identities. You guys really got real identities. And to me, it was, I just think I just don't know how anybody could feel at the end of the day, anybody who grew up in that time. Because I talked to Keltner. Keltner says there's plenty of cats with amazing resumes, and they're still resentful because they're not getting the calls anymore. And I just don't understand why you would ever feel that way when you literally lived through the greatest time in Western American music.
Well, musicians want to keep going. They don't want it to end. They don't want to be part of a movement that lasts for a few years and then goes away. They want to keep playing. They want to be in the game, as it were, and that's important. But it's also with a lot of guys who aren't getting royalties, particularly, or big checks from the union, like Hal gets. I mean, Hal played on a million records. I mean, he wrote the book.
Yeah.
He was probably one of the most influential drummers that ever lived, and he played on so many records. You know the story. But what happens is that things change and musical styles change, and then they change back.
How have you? I want to ask you, how have you kept from the mental point of view, not your technical not the chops? How have you continued to keep yourself in the game?
Well, I got kind of kicked upstairs to become a producer in the early '80s.
Was that a conscious decision? You said kicked upstairs, sort of. You were forced to go up there.
Well, I always had it in my mind that I'd like to produce records because I had learned from the best. I learned from Peter Asher and Lou Adler. And Peter got me a job producing Louise Goffin, Jerry Goffin, and Carol's daughter for Asylum, I think it was, and he recommended me, and that's what was my first production. And then, amazingly, I got to work with Don Henley when he started doing his solo stuff. So at that point, I kind of changed over to being a producer more than being a session cat.
Mm-hmm.
And also, once you're perceived as a producer, in L.A. at that time, people stopped calling you to do dates because now you're a producer, And it's very hard to do both. Now, I think it's very easy to do that. In other words, everyone's a producer, everyone can play. And, it's a different world. But back then, you were either one or the other, And
it's nice though.
Guys were afraid to go on. Guys were afraid to go on the road because they'd feel they'd lose out on gigs in town, things like that.
We got one more piece of music here for Danny Kortchmar, and again, this is named that tune. So I wish you the best of luck with this one. All right.
All right.
A stranger lying on the ballroom floor had drank so much he could drink no more. So he fell asleep with a troubled brain to dream that he rode on a downbound train. The engine was blood, it was sweating damp and brilliantly lit with a brimstone lamp. An imp for fuel was shoveling bones while the furnace rang with 1,000 groans. The boiler was filled with lager beer. The devil himself was the engineer. The passengers, they were a motley crew. Some were foreigners, others he knew. Rich men in broadcloth, big the devil, we're getting there. Oh, how those passengers shriek with pain and beg old Satan to stop.
All right, what do you got for us, brother?
Well, that definitely sounds like David Clayton Thomas.
Yeah,
I don't know that.
that's exactly right. It's the Tequila Sunrise. That's where I discovered Danny Kortchmar on this really eccentric album. I mean, it's on Columbia, but I've never seen what a wild crew of people with Smitty, you, Tessie, and then of course I want you to tell me about tell me about that set. Did you know David? Was he one of these Laurel Canyon cats? How did you meet David?
I met David Clayton Thomas in Greenwich Village at the Night Out Cafe. He came in with the band, and he played and sang just like B.B. King from Canada.
Right.
And, I mean, he sounded just like B.B. King. And, of course, one of my all-time heroes. And I was like, wow, this guy's really got it. Then he ended up in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And after that, he became, so he went from, the bottom to the top, kind of. And by the time he was out in L.A., and he made that album, we were all hanging out together. I think Chuck was on bass, and that was a big part of it for me. Chuck Rainey was and is one of my absolute heroes in American music. Just great. I couldn't believe I was getting to play with him, actually.
Did you get a chance to talk to David about how he was brought up?
No.
Because his father used to beat him severely. I mean, his dad was David was a boxer eventually, but he was a really tough dude. And then, like you said, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And then he went out to Columbia. But that scene, do you remember that making that record? Because Rainey's holding a little dog. Everybody looks like they're having a ball. He's in a chair with a bottle of tequila. But wasn't it up at his house? Or when I talked to Kenneth Rice, he said it was up at maybe David's house somewhere.
Yep, that's right. But that's where we used to rehearse. I can't remember where we cut the record, but we used to rehearse up there. And Spider and Chuck, Smitty, man, what a crew! I was in heaven because I loved all those guys. Loved playing with them. That R&B and blues twist on that stuff. That's where I live. And
absolutely. I mean, and was that the first time you played with him, or did you? I want to get every record with Kortchmar, Spider, Rice, and Rainey on.
Well, let me see this. I think we all played together on, that's Reggie McBride, also fantastic.
Unreal, yeah.
Is on an Etta James album produced by Trevor Lawrence for Chess Cadet, or Chess.
Oh, Baby, What You Want Me to Do, or something like that?
I can't remember the name of it. I know that Trevor had written out all the charts. There was another guitar player on the date as well, and I can't remember, but it was Spider on drums, and I think Reggie McBride on bass. Anyway, similar crew. Everybody knew everybody else, And this is what, I wanted to do. I wanted to play some funk and some R&B. That was what I'd always done, and that's really what I wanted to do. That's where my heart was.
In our final moments here, Danny, can you talk about, how did you originally link up with Jeff Pevar?
With Peeve?
Peeve, yeah.
It's funny. He's from this area. He's from this area, which is where I am right now, which is Connecticut. And he comes up here and plays he still comes up here and plays all the time. He's a local hero. He grew up playing in the bars around here. And I've been hearing about Jeff, but I hadn't met him. I guess I met him in New York on he was playing with Johnny Rosh, who's a in New York well-known singer and piano player. And he had a steady gig, Johnny did, up on the upper West Side, and he'd play there basically every week, and he'd always have like a real heavy-duty cast of characters. Everyone in New York played with him. All the great musicians were playing. We'd go up and play with Johnny. So I was there one night, and I think there was a mutual friend of ours was there, and who introduced. Jeff was playing, was sitting in with Johnny, and I was introduced to him. And Jeff is a wonderful fellow. He's just such a sweet guy. Immediately we got along great, and we became friends, and managed and did a few more gigs. And when he comes here, sometimes I play if I can, and if he can, we play gigs together. So, and he's a real pleasure. I always learn something with him.
Do you get to play funk? A lot of funk with him?
Yeah, it's like an R&B rock some funk, but not the heavy duty funk, but some. It's a variety of stuff. Let me put that one.
What is this is also a big part of the program is love, and I just wanted you to talk about your concept of love and how it relates to how you fit into a musical setting.
Well, musicians are all about love, and the musicians I know, and I know a lot of them, they absolutely love each other. They love playing together. They glow, and I do too. It's a profound situation to play music with other people. It creates a bond, and I can't really describe it. It's just when you love music. The cats I knew, they started to play and listen when they were 10. It was a lifetime thing with all of us, and so to be able to play with each other is a joyous experience. It's just absolute joy, and that's the best way I can describe it. It's all about the love.
Right. Well, I mean, and when you guys were all together in the studios playing together, that even fosters it more. How have are either of your kids musicians?
Well, my youngest daughter is a songwriter, and she's going to college right now, music college.
And she's having a different academic musical education than your father did, huh?
Than my father.
Than you did.
Then her father did. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I studied privately when I was a kid. I took guitar lessons and theory, and studied classical guitar at one point.
The Slugs is a great education. To be able to see those burners, that's pretty good.
Well, at that point in New York City, all hell was breaking loose. Every kind of music you can imagine was going on. Just like you just said, you could go from city to any number of jazz clubs. I saw Cecil Taylor and Eric Dolphy and these cats, and Mingus. I saw, me and my buddies went into New York every weekend, and we went to the Apollo Theater pretty much, like every week. Every week we could make it. We'd go there on Friday when the new bill would come on, and it was, an incredible education. I mean, you can't imagine. Everyone you could imagine was playing in New York at that time, and you could just walk in and see them. There was clubs all over the place. Of course, it's all gone now. But
yeah. Well, listen, Danny, I got to tell you, we made it to 2:00, man, and I really want to thank you so much for taking the time, brother. All right, and we'll do it again soon.
Certainly.
All right.
Great. My pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Very good.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you next week.
Fox Sports Trending now.
We start with news out of the NFL, where Patriots head coach Bill Belichick called an impromptu press conference earlier to address the issue of Deflategate.
At no time was there any intent whatsoever to try to compromise the integrity of the game or to gain an advantage. We feel like we